All right. Well, today I have another special guest. Her name is Vera. And she is starting up a new lesbian magazine called Jill Magazine. And so we're going to have a talk with her about that experience and what's going on. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Carol. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. So introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us where you're from. Why'd you start this up? And
Sure. So my name is Vera, and I'm Canadian. Actually, I'm from Ontario, Toronto, kind of a big city. But over the last decade and a half or so, I've slowly been migrating east to Prince Edward Island, which is our smallest province. As my grandmother learned when she was a new immigrant from Germany, PEI is the smallest province with the biggest potatoes, and that's true. Unrelated to lesbians, but it's a true fact. Fun fact about PEI. So I'm out here on PEI, and I'm a semi-retired teacher. I was a classroom teacher for 100 years and then vice principal and worked in curriculum development and that sort of thing. I still do a bit of subbing out here on PEI, but mostly I'm semi-retired. I joke that I'm a frugally kept woman. My wife is a captain for a regional airline, and they don't pay as much in Canada as they do in the US, so hence the frugal. But it's kind of great, and we're back and forth between PEI and Ontario. And I'm here now. I'm based here. I wanted to start this magazine, I guess, sort of for two reasons. I just over the last couple of years, and I'm sure we'll get into this in the interview, I peaked. I was a big supporter of the alphabet soup community umbrella for many years, certainly since I came out when I was 38. I'm 51 now. But I did peak over the last few years and just kind of had enough, and so the frustration of not having um, female voices sort of gathered, unadulterated or unpolluted in one place was frustrating to me, and I wanted to maybe start a new opportunity to do that. There's lots of great magazines that used to be out there, websites that were lesbian focused that have, evolved over time. And I don't want to argue about whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but certainly I think there's a missing piece for lesbians. And so I wanted to start a magazine that wasn't, it's not transphobic. I always say this. My wife says, nobody's going to care. You can talk logic till you're blue in the face. They're still going to call you a transphobe and a turf,
I,
but it's
I'm
not,
gonna
just for
I'm
the
gonna agree with
record.
her.
Okay. But just for the record, it's not supposed to be transphobic. It's not about whether or not trans women or trans identified men um, are supported in the space. It's about this is for women, this is for lesbians, and so that was kind of I guess there, two main goals. So to give lesbians an authentic, unmuzzled voice in print. And also just to provide like a fun experience, a thoughtful, entertaining, well curated collection of pieces, whether they're written or there's going to be some original art and some photography as well, that are of interest to lesbians in particular and our female allies. I'm sort of casting a
Mhm.
little bit of a wide net there, but definitely focused on females.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've come to the show like most of us have, right? You're like, "Wait a minute, there's nothing out here. Uh,
Hmm.
I'm gonna make it."
Yeah.
Right? I love
Totally.
that. I love that.
Yeah. So and happily you're not alone. Others love it too, but also not everybody does, as I've been discovering.
So, how long ago did you get this project underway?
um, I guess I'd sort of been mulling it over in my mind very subtly for the last 8 to 12 months.
Okay.
And then the creative juices really hit, I guess about 4 to 6 months ago. I've been working with interestingly, a group of Buddhist nuns out here on the island doing some curriculum work with them. Who would have thought
Interesting.
there was a monastery for Buddhist nuns in sleepy old Prince Edward Island, Canada? But there is. And it was just a really cool experience to be surrounded exclusively by women.
Mhm.
We had some meetings online and in person. And I think over the course of our meetings on a completely unrelated, project, I really kind of came to it more fully and committed and decided I'm going to do this magazine. And the last time I did anything like this probably would have been between first and second year university, where a few of us broke into the office of our employer and printed like a weekly, just a fun little tribune that was supposed to be sort of silly and fun and not, you know, but it was just printed in black and white on 8.5 by 11 paper and stapled together. And distributed surreptitiously before everybody got to work every week. But so this is a little bit larger scale than that. But yeah, so the last couple of months I've really sort of launched into it. And you, amongst other lesbians, have been really supportive. I think there's between 3 and 5 really core support lesbians. I think that really inspired me to move forward with it. But there's been, a much larger audience of contributors and donators, subscribers. So I'm really excited to get the first issue at the door in the next month or so.
So how often are you going to be having issues out?
Well, originally I ambitiously thought, yeah, we're going to do it 3 to 4 times a year. And now having gone through the process and realizing, just the magnitude of the work involved. I think annually would be great. Twice a year would be fantastic, but I'd
Yeah.
like to at least get it out once a year. And we'll sort of see. There's a few women who've been in the background, kind of, supporting me emotionally and financially in some cases, who've suggested sort of getting a board together for future issues and talking through it, ideas and advertising, that sort of thing. Our first issue has no advertising at all, which is by design. I didn't want to be beholden to advertisers. But it also means that there's really no income generation. So everybody from writers to photographers to editors, including myself, is totally volunteer.
Mhm.
And we have to raise all the money for printing and shipping through donations. So that's been a bit of a challenge. And I don't think I could keep that up full time for multiple issues a year. But I think with a board, even, just 3 to 5 dedicated women who'd, sort of share that workload a bit. I think we can definitely get 1 and maybe 2 issues a year. Might be kind of fun. I don't know if there's even, interest for more than that anyway. Like, people are busy, people live online, there's lots of online spaces. So I think there's interest in having a print magazine, and the idea of something in
Yeah.
your mailbox is kind of fun, but I don't know if we have to do it 4 times a year.
What made you go with print instead of like a website?
It's all the young kids are asking me that. I don't know. I'm an 80s
I'm not
child.
that young.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I used to get Chickadee first when I was really young, and then Owl magazine. I don't know if I think it's a Canadian thing. So maybe, I don't know if you've heard of that, but um, just it was like this variety magazine. Those were nature focused, but there were other magazines like that would arrive in the mail, and they had crafts in them and photos and like puzzles and some short stories. And I always got really excited to have that in my hot little hands, and kind of page through it. And there was like mazes and fill in the blanks, and so I wanted to sort of recapture that a little bit. Like, I feel like there's so much, everyone's so locked into the immediacy of the digital world, where you share a story or an opinion, or, you deconstruct some news article. And right away, there's 500 people who are going to jump on you and tell you why you were wrong, or, that sort of thing. And I feel like a print magazine, first of all, sort of removes that and allows you to just absorb, whether it's a fun piece or a serious piece, to just absorb it and enjoy it and think about it for a few minutes, kind of like a podcast, actually, right? Like, there's not this immediate barrage of opinions following up. And then the second thing is, it's just kind of fun, I think, to get something in the mail. Like, we don't get that anymore. Everybody still has a mailbox, but I don't know what's in it other than flyers from time to time, a bill maybe, right?
Well, if you're me, it's mostly bills, but hey.
Yeah. So so that's why I think that, I think it'll be fun to get something in the mail. We're actually including some stickers too in this first issue. So you get your magazine and some stickers. I'm totally reliving the 80s. I'm not going to lie. I think there's definitely a demographic that will enjoy this more than others.
I do too. I'm glad that you mentioned. I know a lot of lesbians that probably really dig this idea. And I think you're right. It's helpful to disengage from online and internet stuff and touch grass. Magazines are more touching grass situation.
I think so. Yeah. And it's been really interesting too, to get some of I was really worried about content at first. And you may recall, I was messaging you too, and a couple other people thinking, oh my God, what if we get no contributions, right? It's going to be like an 8-page magazine. Nobody's going to buy it. But I found, actually, I'm really overwhelmed by the depth and breadth of the stories that have come in. And our official submission deadline isn't until Monday, but I've gotten, I think, the vast majority of stuff has already come in, and we've started working through editing. And it's almost like, yeah, you get people offline and into something that they know is going to be published in print. and their voice changes a bit, right? Even their written voice changes, and it's been kind of exciting. I'm looking forward to the finished product for sure.
That's really cool. You know what else I like about actual physical magazines and books and stuff is because you keep your history is kept that way, right?
Totally. Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it firsthand online, websites being taken down, things being gotten rid of. If someone doesn't pay for their website, it's
Mhm.
down. So I mean, this stuff's important. I've
Yeah.
also, I've seen and heard stories of even universities that have archives, kind of well, the people who go through the archives and make write papers and stuff, the kids in the university now, they're distorting what is in those archives, but the archives still exist, right? So if
Yes.
you go and you
Yeah.
look at it, it still exists. They switch it up the language all they want, but
Yeah. You can go on to the original source and see
yeah.
them. Yeah.
And so that's one thing that I think is really cool about having actual print is that you get to keep your history.
It's true.
And
Yeah.
and especially lately, I've really realized how important that is. I mean, I came out in like 2001. So like the late 90s into the 2000s, when I was, discovering my sexuality and, figuring shit out and go to the bookstore and get a lesbian book and the gay section, all this kind of stuff. And, if you, I did not think then that we would be here now at the
Oh,
point where,
totally. Yeah, when you're saying that, I was just thinking about during Pride Week, even this summer, I walked into our local library and just to kind of check out what was there, and it's all queer fiction. I'm doing air quotes, right? Because
Mhm.
we all know queer doesn't mean lesbian anymore in a lot of cases, right? So that was really sad to me, like to not be able to find a book about me,
Yeah,
you know?
and everything has really been overshadowed by trans
Mhm.
ideology, and here's the
Totally.
thing, you can argue even if you wanna say that trans still belongs in the community, that's fine, but why isn't there balance? Like, there is just an
Yeah.
overwhelming I mean, why aren't we
Yes.
talking about lesbian stories? Why aren't we talking more about, you know,
Mhm.
butch lesbians and femme lesbians and all the different types of,
Yeah.
identities and existence within the lesbian community?
Absolutely. I know everything's just sort of being muddied into this. I feel like, when you have all these different colors of paint and, you can mix two together and get a different hue, but if you mix them all together, it just turns into a big brown blob.
That
I
is a
feel like that's
really
what's
good
kind of happened with the queer community.
That is a great analogy, and the thing I always say, yes, there's a history of gays using queer. That's
Right.
fine. I mean, I don't care if a gay person uses queer to describe themselves. The issue I
Right.
have with it is the fact that it's now being used to encompass everybody, which I
Yeah.
think, first of all, deletes the individual groups because each group is different and you have to I think
Yes.
that's respectful, and to me, that's a very liberal value to respect different classes and systems and understand that should have their
Mhm.
own individual identities, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other part of that is that queer, also to a lot of us, is a word we would not use to
Blur.
describe ourselves.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I never used queer and I would never use queer. And the
Yeah.
fact that now we've given full reign for all the fucking heterosexual people to call us queer really pisses me off. Can you imagine going to work and having like some fucking straight woman
Mhm.
across the thing going, "Hey, how do you queers think about this?"
Well, it's so funny. When I first came out, I was kind of like loud and proud. I'd been in the closet for 38 years. I wasn't going to stay in there. And I hated the word lesbian, and we'll get into that in a minute. But so I
Yeah.
adopted queer. For a while, I was using it quite heavily, and my wife was appalled. My girlfriend at the time, she just didn't like that word at all. And more, she's turned away from it. And I have now as well. It's because of, what we're just talking about for sure. It's just this big umbrella term that doesn't even mean anything anymore. I liked it for a while because I thought it was, yeah, queer, a little bit unusual. It doesn't quite fit in. That's totally me, except now it's all the trendies that are queer. And I don't fit in with them either. So it definitely doesn't work for me anymore, and I'm trying more and more to adopt the word lesbian. There's a lot of internalized misogyny, and you got to wrestle with that, right? And
Oh,
probably
yes.
internalized homophobia too. Yeah, I really resisted that word for a while, and I'm coming around to it now. I'm embracing my femaleness again.
Good, good. So tell me a little bit about your coming out. Yeah, it came out late.
Yeah, I came out late. It was so funny that first year we went to Pride in Toronto, my girlfriend and I. And I remember this older woman in her late 60s, and she was wearing a t-shirt, 68, out late, looking for a date. And I thought, oh my God, good for her. That's just awesome, you know?
I love
So
that.
I wasn't that late, but I was 38. And I had just, I was married with two kids. I had twins. They were, well, 4 or 5 at the time. They're quite young. And I was a vice principal at a school, and kind of was getting into a little bit of trouble personally, you know, and I think it was because I was frustrated, closeted and frustrated, you know. My mother died when I was in my early 20s. She had cancer. And so that whole, late teens, early 20s, when you're finding yourself and supposed to figure all that shit out, I was looking after my dying mother, right? So that's my excuse. So anyway, she died. I got married to a man. I became a teacher, which I'd always wanted to be a teacher. It was great. Everything was great. And then I got into my 30s and realized, yeah, no, everything is not great, and it wasn't my career. It was my personal life. So anyway, I went through kind of this inner turmoil and I started working on my pilot license of all things. I always wanted to learn how to fly airplanes. I thought, how hard can it be? I have a driver's license, it's probably the same. Not the same at all, by the way. Very
Good to know
hard. I
because
did get it. I did get it finally, but yeah, it was a little harder than I thought it would be. But my flight instructor went on vacation early on in my flight training, was gone for 2 or 3 weeks. And he said, why don't you fly with Tatiana? And she was at the time, the only female flight instructor there. Oh, yeah, you girls need to stick together. So off I went, had a lesson or two with her. And she was like, she's really smart. So she was a great instructor and was debriefing after the lesson, kind of telling me what went well, what didn't go well. And we were standing at the desk and I was looking at her and I noticed she had really nice brown eyes. I was really kind of, it threw me, right? Because I'm a woman. I'm not supposed to notice her eye color. Like, what's going on there, And so that really just started this whole process of a very slow emergence out of the closet for me. We became really good friends really quickly. We started writing odd emails to each other. I don't know how she would have identified. She didn't really like labels, but she definitely knew she was not straight. She'd never been with a woman. Um, but she definitely, she knew I was a lesbian, and and I claimed I wasn't, and she was laughing at me thinking, "What are you talking about? Like, you're totally trying to pick me up and flirt with me." And I was just so heavily closeted that I didn't even recognize it myself. So we did that for about 2 or 3 months, and then, finally clued in that, actually I was in fact a lesbian. And so then that was all good. But, it was complicated, right? Because I was married to a guy and we had young children, and what do you do about that? So I was pretty open and honest with him about it. I think if we were both being honest, the problem wasn't just that I was gay. Like, there were other issues in the marriage, but it was convenient for him to blame it on that. So, we did it the best we could, kind of transition through that. And actually the three of us lived all together at some point for maybe 2 or 3 months. Kind of tried that on for size, just because we were trying to trying to put the kids first and see what would work best for them. And it was great. Like, she took a bunch of time off work because, she knew she wanted to help and make sure the transition was good for the kids. So she was taking the kids to school and making dinner, and me and him were going to work, bringing home the bacon. And it was kind of this really utopian, brilliant thing, except that she and I were in love and he was the third wheel. So that kind of ended
yeah.
fairly quickly by his request. And I'm glad it did. It really, I think that kind of thing can work with the right people, but it wasn't the right people for us. But yeah, so we've been together since then. It's been, I guess, 12, 13 years. And she finally made an honest woman out of me 2 years ago. We got married. And yeah, it's been great. The kids are where our twins are like 20, 20, 21, 20 now. So she's
So you
essentially their
I'm
mother too.
fascinated. I'm sorry, I'm fascinated. I might cut this,
Yeah.
but I'm
No, it's
fascinated
okay.
by
Yeah.
the coming out late stories.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had you ever had any kind of crushes or any experience with women or girls
Yeah.
before your marriage?
That's a really interesting experience, or a question. Nothing. I had no formal experience, if you want to call it that. I certainly didn't have any physical experiences. But in retrospect, like, it was funny, once I came out, And one of the things we had to do was tell his parents, that we were getting divorced, and but wait, there's more, you know. And so I remember very distinctly going out for dinner. He and I took his parents out for dinner to have the talk with them. And Tats was actually looking after the kids, and off we went for dinner to tell them that I was gay. And so after dinner, we said, yeah, so we're getting divorced. They weren't surprised. They knew that was coming. And then I said, it was the first time I had to say the words, I'm gay. And it was so hard to say that to my in laws. Like it was just, I couldn't get the words out, but I finally did. And his mother slammed her fist on the table and said, I knew it. And that was kind of the general consensus. Like nobody was surprised when I came out except me, right? I was totally in denial.
Oh, yeah.
But in retrospect, I don't know how I could not have known. Like all the classic signs were there. I totally had a huge crush on my grade 6 art teacher. Um, she was this incredible Indian, like this woman from Guyana, beautiful hair, swishy dresses, and I was very femme, right? I was very into her. She was creative and, independent and just gorgeous. Um, I also like I remember going with friends, like this was the 80s, right? So there was a lot of Penthouse and Hustler magazines. Speaking of print magazines. So I had this one friend whose dad, I guess, had a subscription or something, and the dirty magazines were behind the couch. And so, like lots of teenage girls do, we'd go and look at them from time to time. But I always wanted to look at them. Like whenever we hung out together, that was like, hey, let's go do this. So, again, in retrospect, not a surprise there that I was interested in the female body. The other thing was I remember walking through malls and being really attracted to like the female mannequins, like just the curvy shapes. And I always in my head, I had this narrative that, oh yeah, I just have an appreciation for the female body. It's like you can appreciate males and females, and that's all fine. And it doesn't mean I'm a lesbian or anything. I didn't even know what it was, right? Like I remember people used this word in the 80s, dyke or fag or butch wasn't really used in my community, but dyke was definitely a bad word. I didn't know what it was, but I knew it was bad. And
Yeah.
apparently my band teacher was a dyke and she had short hair and played the clarinet. So that was bad.
Oh, no.
Whatever it was, I didn't want to be that, but
Not the clarinet.
no, I know. Well, newsflash, I was a raging dyke. So anyway, so yeah, out late. And it was funny, I think, because I was her first partner too, like that first year and a half. Oh my God, we were like teenagers. We went to all these like sex parties and pride and this and that. Like we did everything. Now we've kind of, the dust has settled a bit and we still have a healthy sex life, but it's not quite as crazy as it was the first, it was like we were 16 and just, coming out for the first time. So,
Yeah, that's interesting. And
yeah.
so is she about the same age as you?
No, actually, she's 10 years younger than I am. And she's
Okay.
Russian. She's Russian, which is kind of a big deal because it's a very homophobic society. Like she's
Yeah.
basically disowned her parents. They don't, and her brother, they don't speak. They're very, very homophobic. She's part of a Russian lesbian forum online that's just got shut down recently because somebody found out about it, the authorities, like it's a whole other level of homophobia in that culture
Yeah.
that I was not really, I kind of knew, but wasn't totally aware of. So yeah, but so she's 10 years younger, which I didn't know when we got together because she seems so mature.
I'm curious when you when you had your, like, first kiss or your first experience
Mhm.
with her, um, was that like a dawning moment for you? Were
Yeah,
you
so
kinda
okay,
like, "Oh, is
yeah,
this how it's supposed to feel?" Like, because that was for
sort of,
me.
sort of.
I know for me, it was, I I I was like, let's see, between 18 and actually, it was like a year. I had a year where I was just bonkers, right? I was a very
Right,
sheltered kid. So 18 out the gate, I was drinking too
yeah,
much, doing
right,
drugs, and
right,
having lots of sex with guys because that's what you're supposed to do.
right, yeah.
And I had all straight female friends, and they
Oh,
really pressured me to. Well, first
yeah.
of all, I started to get shit because I wasn't interested in guys. And then and then I was a virgin and I got a lot of shit for that. So I
Yes,
felt
oh,
like,
yeah, me too, I remember that.
right?
Yeah.
So I felt like,
So did you
oh,
get called gay? I mean, like, did they think you were maybe a lesbian, or was that a thing, or not really?
actually, I was getting shit for being, like a boy or gay since I was
Yeah,
a kid.
right.
So this is already
Yeah.
percolating back there, and also
Right.
around 16, I got a really heavy crush on a woman, and I realized
Mhm.
I wanna have sex with her, and that freaked me out, and I ran screaming from that,
Right.
and,
Right.
then at 18, I'm doing all this crazy kind of
Right.
self-destructive stuff,
Right.
and I'm having sex with guys, but it's just I'm not interested in them, I don't
Yeah.
wanna date them, I don't want them to hug me, I don't want to make
Right.
out with them, like, I'm not
Yeah.
I am assuming that that's normal.
Right.
Right?
Yes.
And
I
it's
remember
really
that.
confusing too because a lot of the straight girls I was around would joke about how women are just prettier than men, you know? Women's
Yeah.
bodies are just better looking. Oh, penises are so weird looking, and I'm
Yeah.
thinking that's normal, but it's like they're just being I
Yeah.
don't know why they do that, right? Because they obviously love
Yeah.
males.
Yeah, do they? I don't know. I mean,
No,
there's
they
this
do.
whole
They do.
yeah.
It's I honestly, I think it's like this it's a way of keeping your like, because our culture has a very like whore or Madonna mentality.
Yes,
You
that's
know?
true.
So I think
You're not allowed to be sexually excited if you're a woman, right?
yes,
Yeah.
exactly. So I think that's the way they kind of buffer that is
Right.
to pretend this kind
Yeah.
of,
You're not into
famous
it. Yeah.
oh, anyways,
Mhm.
um, and then I had my first kiss with a woman I'd had a crush on for a while. So we were
Right.
friends actually, and my
Okay.
mind was blown. I was like, "Oh my god,
This is what it's supposed to be like.
this is
Yeah.
what they're no wonder these people like having sex with each other. Like if this what is
Yeah.
it about?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Totally.
that was a real turning point for me, so that's why I was curious if you had kind of a
Yeah.
similar experience.
I think I did, but it was over time. I mean, now I can't possibly imagine being with a man, and I don't know how I did it before. I mean, I didn't do it often or well, I think, but, you know, I think and I don't know if this is other women's experience who come out late, and who've been with men before. I think you have to unlearn some of that mechanical stuff, right? Like, it
Mm,
was weird to be with Tats because she was so soft and different and I really like it now and I love it. But it was a bit unusual at first just because it wasn't my schema. Like I was 38 and I'd had sex before and not with a woman, right? So it was a different experience. Um, the other thing she talks about a lot, and I think, this is true to some extent. I mean, there's definitely the physical and visceral um, attraction, and I am very attracted to women. I really love boobs. I'm not going to lie. I'm definitely a boob man. But, I think there's a whole thing with women that we are attracted to each other on a broader level, like, it's not just physical, she talks about this a lot, like, she doesn't really find like, yes, she's attracted to some women, of course, but she couldn't just have sex with any old woman, like, there's this whole package that goes with it, and I think it's different in the straight community. It's more physical in the straight community, maybe? I don't know, and maybe that's just my personal experience, but I think that women are the attraction, it's a
well,
bigger
I th
package,
I
you know?
think what you're hinting at here is that female sexuality and male sexuality are different, and they are.
Yes.
They are
Yeah.
different.
Yeah.
How much and everything, I'm not exactly sure. I
Mm.
think there's a lot of bias in studying it. So
Yeah, that's true, and the other thing is, for women, I mean, just the mechanics of it, right? Like, we are, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, violated every time we have penetrative sex, right? That's just the mechanics of it, whereas men aren't unless they're gay men, or unless they're men who
that's
like to
fascinating you
explore that
use that
stuff.
it's fascinating you use that term, violated. I think that's very telling.
Yes, and I don't feel that way when I'm having penetrative sex with my wife, who's a
Mhm.
woman, right? So I think there's a whole thing out there that's different. And that's, and that kind of leads into the whole trans conversation too about I just had this argument with um a gender neutral whatever she calls herself, they call herself online person that I follow that I do respect the work they do, but I just wish she would embrace her womanhood and
Yeah.
come back to the fold. But anyway, we just had this big argument today about I guess you guys in the US have this trans woman congresswoman or something, and somebody said she can't use the bathroom, and you
She can
know,
use oh,
or that
god
she
damn it.
can't use the
He can use the
he
bathroom. He can use the bathroom.
she can't use the women's bathroom or
No, but
something.
he is completely able to use the men's bathroom, and since he is a man,
Yeah.
that's where he belongs.
Yes, totally. But
Also, they
anyway, so
have
we're
private
having
bathrooms too, so
they well, I figured. But anyway, they all want to use the women's washroom. So this this individual that I was having the conversation with on Instagram, like it's like we're having two different conversations. In
yeah,
their mind, trans is trans is trans.
yeah.
And to me, the whole trans identified men and trans identified women, they're in totally different spheres. And the issues, yes, there's some overlap for sure, but there are totally different issues there, right? Like no man feels unsafe if a trans man is using their washroom, as far as I know. I don't know, I can't speak for every man out there, but that's not a thing, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a totally different, it's just so different. And she can't see it. They can't see it,
Well,
whatever.
it's because it's the denial of sex. It's
Yeah.
denial of sex reality, right?
Yes,
It's and
totally. Yeah.
it's really like, you don't like the, patriarchal world you live in, so what you do is you just put a new name on it and pretend it
Yes,
doesn't exist. It's like
I
trying to
know.
fix a car by changing the paint job.
I know.
Your engine's fucked and you're like, "You know what we're
Yeah,
gonna do? We're gonna repaint this car and it's gonna be okay." It's like,
yeah,
that's not really fixing the problem though.
I
That's what
know.
this whole
It really isn't. I know, and I feel like the left and right, I mean, it's been really obvious since the US election recently, right? Like, we've grown so far apart, and it's a really sad state of affairs where we're not even people think we're arguing, but we're not arguing because we're not talking about the same thing, right?
That's
Like
why anytime I have a discussion with somebody, especially around any kind of trans issue, I start
mhm.
by defining all the language we're going to use. I
Yes.
ask them, what do you mean by trans? What do you mean
Yeah,
by woman? What are your
yeah,
definitions? Because
yes.
what always happens is their
Yeah.
definitions are not my definitions, and we can't even speak,
Exactly. I know, and
which
you can't even get past that, right?
is a problem with the postmodern bastardization of language.
Yes, I know.
You know,
Language matters, right?
yeah, it's how we communicate. Um,
No.
so tell me about your difficulty with using the word or the yeah, tell me about how why it's hard to use lesbian.
Yeah. Well, because a lesbian is a woman, right? A female. And I mean, I think we probably had very similar experiences as in childhood about growing up and not fitting in to the societal expectations of what female is, certainly as a child, right? Like I wasn't into all the same shit that the girls were into. I hung out with the boys most of the time. I started skateboarding in early or late elementary school, and I was playing the drums, and that was boy stuff. That wasn't girl stuff. So because I was in the closet, even with myself, and in total denial about being gay, the way I got around that, I think, was internalized misogyny. I mean, I knew obviously I'm a girl and I'm a woman, but it's like I was denying that part of myself because I didn't fit in with what I was supposed to be as a girl or a woman. And so um, when I did finally come out, I felt like lesbian wasn't the right word for me because lesbians are, women who wear short skirts and heels and lipstick, which is ridiculous. Obviously, that's not true. I mean, some lesbians do, right? But lots of lesbians don't. I don't. Look at my short hair and my flannel.
That is so weird because that's the exact opposite of what I would think lesbian. That's
Really?
yeah. No, lesbian to me was like dyke. Like
Really?
masculine.
Yeah.
And
See, and I remember you asking me, why do you separate? Because the magazine is Jill Magazine, right? It's supposed to be for lesbians, butches, and dykes. And you asked me, why do you separate those terms? Aren't they all the same? And I guess they are, but in my mind, it was a very different thing. And I'm listening to your most recent podcast, and your guest there is talking about how the lesbians in different cities had different looks, right? Like there
mhm.
were Los Angeles lesbians and then the New York lesbians. And I thought, oh, isn't that interesting? So we all have this, again, language matters, right? In our definitions, we all have this different idea of what it is to be a lesbian, what it is to be a woman. I mean, Can't even define
I
woman anymore.
did you a lot of lesbians don't like to use the word lesbian, especially the younger ones, because it's
Mhm.
so pornified.
Yes,
Because lesbian is
yes.
attached to this, like, sexual
Yeah, yeah.
freak
Red
shit with
lipstick and
dudes.
long nails.
Yes, and it sounds like that might be where you're coming from,
I
'cause
think
you s
so.
right? It
Yeah,
sounds like a pornified version of
totally. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that's so not hot, like, I'm not into that at all. I really like, the whole androgynous look, I'm very into that, like, if I remember being at church, like, God, it would have been right before I met my wife, and this woman walked in, and she was obviously a woman, but she was tall, and she was wearing a suit and a tie, and I was very, very into that. I didn't understand what was going on in my head and my body, but I
Mhm.
was like, "Oh," giving her a look, totally trying to find out who is this person? Where'd she come from? I love that. And now I see that type of person as a lesbian. At the time, I
Yeah.
wouldn't have used that word, I think, to describe her.
Well, 'cause I mean, lesbian just encompasses all homosexual females, like,
Yeah,
that's just
exactly.
and then obviously within that category, we have different breakout
Yeah,
subcategories because,
yeah.
people like to have labels and identities, and I don't identity's been so bastardized too by the whole
Yeah.
trans movement, okay? First of all, you cannot identify as something you are not, all right? First rule.
Do you know when I first heard that? Actually, I was chatting a few years ago here in PEI with some Indigenous islanders, I guess, and they were two spirit, lesbian, I don't know. I asked them how they identified. And the one woman got really angry at me, and she was saying exactly that. Just you Westerners always want to talk about how we identify. There's no identify. You either are or you aren't. Right?
Exactly,
And I,
exactly.
I think about that a lot. I think about that a lot.
But the way identity has traditionally been used for,
Yes.
like, hundreds of years before
Right.
postmodernism,
Right.
is that, identity is more like, "I belong to this group.
Right.
I have, things in common with this particular group, so this is the group I identify with," right? So, like,
Yes.
butch, you can say
Yeah.
it's an identity, but in the sense of there's a certain kind of criteria around it, and you both have to kind of meet that criteria, but you also have to embrace the identity because there's a lot of women that I mean, there's some women I may look at and think she's butch, but she doesn't think that way.
Right.
And so
Right.
it does kinda take both, right?
Sure.
And
Yeah.
then you have your femme, and then you have a bunch of that just don't have any really
Yeah.
label,
Right.
and that's all cool. I like all of the
Yeah.
variations, you know?
Yeah. Totally. We like them all. We like all the women.
Yeah. Well, I mean, me personally, I've always been into femmes. That's
Right.
that's what does it for me.
Yeah.
But if I was single, I mean, I wouldn't turn down any I think all
Yeah.
lesbians have something to offer.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
let's see what
Except the trans lesbians.
there's no such thing. So,
If you were
not
single, you'd be in big trouble. And
not not
oh,
unless you're talking about trans identified women, AKA trans men.
that's
Then
right.
then that's the only trans
That's
lesbian
right.
there
Well,
is.
I'm not talking about that.
No,
That
I
was
know.
one of my big peaks. I was just
Oh,
for fun.
yes.
Yeah,
That's what
okay.
I wanted to talk about next. Thank you.
All right. So let me first, yeah, I'll finish this story and then I'll go
Okay.
back. But just for fun, I was kind of flipping through some, it was a lesbian, what I thought was a lesbian dating app just to see, right? Because I'd never been on something like that. And there were a couple of, this was at the time, now it's overrun by this stuff, right? But at the time, there were a few that were clearly not women. And I was
Was
confused by that.
was this when you first came out?
No, it was afterwards. We were already together. I
Oh,
wasn't
okay, okay.
seriously looking for somebody. I just
So
we were
what year did you come out?
okay, I was 38, now I'm 51. So what is that?
Dude, I don't know. I don't do math.
38, 48, 13 years ago. So what are we in now? 2000. What year is it?
So
2024?
2011? 10?
I I guess so,
That's
yeah.
because we're 24 now.
Yeah. Yeah. About yeah, 2010, 2011, yeah.
So you came out around 2010 or 2011.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that you know what? That was when that was uh, stuff was starting to ramp up then, but it
Yes.
wasn't quite there yet. 2015
No.
was the major tipping year.
I keep hearing that, and for me, it was like 2020. It was like during the pandemic that all hell broke loose. But, probably that's because I was out late and then partnered right away, so I wasn't really in tune,
That's true. That's a
with
good point.
things.
You weren't in the
Yeah.
community really,
No.
right? Yeah.
No.
Okay, so
So
sorry, continue.
yeah, no, so I would just for fun, we were farting around on this lesbian app and sort of swiping through things, and then I noticed there were some people on there that were I mean, you never know for sure, but they didn't seem like women to me, And so I wrote to the app developer. I'm so out to lunch, right?
Wait, you
Oh,
wrote?
I'll
Was it
just
a letter?
explain to them. No, I did. It was through the help button. I'll just
Okay.
explain to them that there's some men here and they'll fix it, right? They're so
Oh, no.
naive, so naive. I get this email back about being inclusive and trans women are women. And I was like, what? But I'm a lesbian. It was just so obvious to me that, this was not appropriate, but apparently I was wrong. So, apparently it's transphobic if you're a lesbian and you don't like girl dick. Who knew? So,
Eesh.
yeah, so that was sort of an interesting experience. But actually, prior to that, my big peak moment involved the whole J.K. Rowling blog post. So
Mm.
my wife, I think, is probably on the autism spectrum, and she's just also really, really smart. So there's social skills, not always. I mean, she's developed some over the time we've been together, but if she thinks something, she'll just say it because it's logical and it makes sense. And she,
I feel her pain. ADHD is I it's
yes,
jokingly called autism light, and it really
yeah,
is.
I know, and that's a factor. And I have raging ADHD too, but I'm also an artsy. I'm not a mathematician, so I've learned a few social tricks. But anyway, she did not have the social tricks. So she would say all these really vitriolic, she'd make all these vitriolic comments about trans people. And at the time, before I peaked, I was very upset by that. I thought, how, like, we're all in the rainbow umbrella together, and how can you be so, yeah.
Could you give me an example of what the vitriol was that she said?
It was more her tone of voice. Like, she's not having any of this shit, right?
Mhm.
Like, I can't even remember exact phrases or words, but it would be, it'd be things like men can't be women and, things about
Oh
girls
my
and
god.
stuff like that. But the way in which she said, she was just so angry and hostile. And I was still at the point where I didn't know a lot of trans people. I knew some gender nonconforming people, but including myself and her for that matter, but I didn't know any full on, trans folks. So I just felt like she was being really hostile and uninviting and unwelcoming, and she'd obviously been doing a lot of thinking and reading about the impacts of trans identified men in women's spaces, and I hadn't really thought about any of that yet. For me, it was just, be kind. I'm a teacher, right? An elementary teacher, so I was still being kind. So she and I would have a lot of fights about this because I was, okay, let's have a conversation, but you don't have to say it that way. Let's be more respectful, and she wasn't having any of it. And then out came all the stuff on social media about J.K. Rowling's a transphobe and it's disgusting. And she wrote all these transphobic blog posts and blah, blah, blah. And I was disappointed because I love J.K. Rowling. I love the books. So finally I thought, well, I'm gonna go and read this blog post. Talk about going back to the original source, right?
Oh
So
no.
I went to read the
Don't
transphobic.
don't no, you never do that. You never read the source for yourself.
You just believe what other people say, right?
Exactly.
I know. So I'm reading this thing and she's so articulate, right? It's so well written. And this was back before, I mean, she's gone full turf now and I can't say I blame her, right? But at the time she was being quite reasonable. And her fear was for young women in particular, actually, who were seeing no way out of patriarchy other than to transition. That's what she was writing about. And I thought, wow, this is really good stuff. So, like, where's the transphobic stuff? I kept reading and waiting for the transphobic part to come up, and it never did. And that, I think, for me was the first light bulb moment. I was like, well, huh? I don't get it. We're reading the same shit and you're seeing this and I'm seeing this, right? Like, we're not.
You know what though? I don't think most people actually read it, and do you know what I'm saying?
I
And
totally
if
agree with
they
you.
and if they did read it, they couldn't bring themselves to
Yeah,
admit that it was reasonable because they didn't wanna
totally.
be,
Wrong.
uh, you know,
Yeah, I
tortured
know.
online or whatever you wanna call it.
Yes, yeah.
Canceled. They
Well,
didn't wanna be
they
canceled.
didn't wanna be canceled, totally. And so that was my first aha moment, and And then another thing that happened, because then I started thinking about these things and the implication of, because, she was also a big advocate and was speaking out against, I guess it was trans-identified men and women's rape crisis centers and stuff like
Yeah.
that, which totally makes sense to me. Like, how that's a no-brainer, but apparently that's transphobic to say that. I don't get it. There's a great article, by the way, in the upcoming issue of Jill on some women in the UK who did a whole protest about that and being muzzled around a rape crisis center. It's kind
Oh,
of
cool, cool.
little plug for the magazine. But yeah. So then my second awakening, I guess, was I was at a teacher conference, and there was the organization. I can't. It was probably one of the big organizations, the LGBTQ groups, and they had these two trans folks there, FOLX. So I went to chat with them because I thought, I got to get to the bottom of this, right? Like, people are saying J.K. Rowling's transphobic and she's obviously not. And, I want to understand this. So I went to talk with them and try to have this reasonable conversation about, what about these? Yes, of course, we want everyone to feel safe, but that also includes women. And so what about these situations like rape crisis centers or blah, blah, blah? And they just shut me down. Like, there was no conversation. Well, you're being transphobic. You can't say things like that. And that's disgusting. And
Were these women or men?
they were guys.
Oh, they were men, okay.
They were guys. Yeah. And I was kind of floored by that. I thought, how, like, how can you not disagree respectfully? Like, it's okay to disagree. Like, as I taught my grade threes in class that year, you can have a disagreement and do it respectfully. Like, you don't always have to agree, but you
Mhm.
have to hear each other and, kind of try to understand each other. And there was just none of that. Like, there was no having any conversations.
Nope.
Nope. And so I've been very lucky over the last few years. I didn't plan to retire early, but I've sort of semi-retired as I moved to PEI. My wife and I kind of look after this elderly gentleman too, and that was starting to take up more time. And so I left my full-time job here as a curriculum consultant at the college when my wife moved from first officer to captain, because she was making a bit more money, not a lot, but enough that we could kind of work it out. So I'm so grateful for that because it's allowed me to speak up without fear of losing my job, because it's happened. Like, I've reposted stuff, just things like news headlines about men and women's prisons, who can they identify as women. So now they're being housed with female inmates and some of the repercussions of that. Or when the research longitudinal studies started to come out about the effects of puberty blockers on children, I'd repost some of that because I think it's important. If you're a parent of a trans child, whatever that even means, that's a whole other conversation, right? It's
Yeah.
important to know that because, as you've pointed out, the medical field is not providing fulsome support, right? It's like, okay, you
Yeah.
think you're trans, great, check the box, here's your ticket to go for surgery, right? So I'd repost some of the stuff and I'd get raked over the coals. The HR department at the college called me in and we had this really difficult conversation one time because apparently these posts were transphobic. It was a
Oh,
turf
so
because
you were working at the college?
part-time. I had already,
Part-time?
thank
Okay.
God, I had already left because we were looking after this guy and, my wife got this promotion and she said, why don't you deal with all the household stuff and I'll take a turn being the primary breadwinner. So I'd left, but I was still teaching like sessional courses and doing a bit of curriculum consulting for them. And so it was weird because I was a consultant, I wasn't an employee. So technically they didn't have jurisdiction, but somebody had complained because I think what happened is I got brigaded, right? I got into it with some folks online here after a
Oh.
news article had been published. They didn't like that, so they found out where I worked and went and filed,
Mhm.
a complaint, like that whole game.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I got called into the HR department and we had this what I thought was a really rich conversation. It was a man and a woman. The woman said to me, "Well, you clearly know a lot more about this than we do. We're still at the beginning stages of this whole equity journey." And I said, "No problem. I'm happy to have these conversations. I know it's a really difficult but important topic. And, as a parent of two young post-secondary age kids myself, of course, I want them to be safe and welcomed. One of them identifies as bisexual, um, if they were girls, I'd want to make sure they were safe, on girls' sports teams. And so it's messy stuff, and I'm happy to chat about it. So I thought we had this great conversation. Meanwhile, we went away They put me on their blacklist to make sure nobody hired me for any more curriculum work or sessional courses because
Wait,
I'm
how does that work? How
well,
does a
I don't
blacklist
know officially what happened, but I was having lunch with some former colleagues afterwards. I had already finished teaching a sessional course and I hadn't yet signed up for another one, but it was offered to me
Mhm.
sort of in between, just before this conversation happened. And I turned it down because I was busy with other stuff. But I was having lunch with some former colleagues, and yeah, word on the street was, "Oh yeah, no, that conversation did not go well, and people have been advised not to rehire you for projects." It was
Wow.
how is that even legal? Because I'm posting that puberty blockers have been shown to cause long term health problems for children.
Yeah,
Like
I wonder, like, is there any kind of legal.
I did go to actually, I went and looked a little bit into the Human Rights Tribunal in our province just to sort of see what my options were. Because I thought if I walked away from that conversation thinking it went well, but meanwhile, they're now shit talking me behind my back, like, is there legal recourse there? Because that's my reputation. Because even if I'm not working at the college, it's a small province, it's a small island. I do, I mean, obviously, I want to speak the truth, but I do also have a professional reputation to maintain, right? Um, So I did go and seek sort of some very informal legal, and I was very generic about it because I didn't want to give too much information. But the whole system has been, especially, I don't know what it's like in the US, but in Canada, the whole system has been taken over and infiltrated.
Yeah.
I just went for about a month ago, I just for shits and giggles, I had a Zoom interview for a position on the women's, not the women's secretary, but some women's committee here on the island. I thought, oh yeah, I'll volunteer with their board. And, obviously my experience and skill set was a good match. So they interviewed me. Within minutes, it became very clear that the women's group was a group for women and trans identified men. Everyone's welcome. Everybody, like,
Then it's not a
provincially.
women's group.
So it's not a
Then why
women's
then
thing.
why do we have these groups?
I know. I don't know. Well, because trans women are women. And if you say otherwise, you're transphobe.
Yeah.
And I am so grateful to be A, over 50, because I just don't give a flying fuck anymore. But B, not to have to count on my own income. Like, I've already made my money. I have I'm not wealthy, but we own real estate. My wife has a job. And she supports me more or less. And so I do a few little side hustles, but I'm not dependent on full-time work, so I can afford to be canceled. But most people can't, right? Like, young women
Yeah. Yeah.
are working. My son is going to be a teacher. He's in university. He said, "Oh God, mom, I'm deep in the sauce." Like, they've all got their pronouns at the end of their email file, and not because he believes it, but because he doesn't want to get canceled.
I've heard that Canada's really bad.
It's
Like,
crazy,
I mean,
and
I the
yeah,
the thing about the United States is that we have states' rights that are still so powerful, and
yeah,
it's so big, and we have so many people that I think it takes a lot more effort to get
yeah,
things through. And also, we do have quite a divide with our
yes.
politics too.
Yeah. Well, and I think Americans also really value free speech, right? Canadians,
True,
we're
true.
a lot more polite. We don't want to offend anybody. But I do think people are pushing back. And ironically, even though the election was in the US, I do think it's had some impacts here. There's a lot of talk about, not that people love Trump. I mean, I think the guy's a buffoon, but I don't think the people who voted for him in the US, some of them voted for him for sure. But I think many of the people who voted that way, it wasn't a vote for Trump. It was a
Yeah,
vote against the ultra woke left, right? Like, people have just
I
had enough.
completely agree.
And I think that's going
Actually,
to happen here too.
I know women who were
Hmm.
former Democrats that did that. They voted for Trump because
Yeah,
of this trans crap,
I
because of
know.
men and women's spaces, because of
Yeah.
this woke
Yeah.
nonsense.
Yeah. Well, and I think that the results of that election have freed up, and I hear commentary all around the world, but certainly here in Canada, have freed up people to be a little more open with what they're really thinking. I mean, we're
Really?
still careful. People are still being
Yeah.
careful, but I think there's a lot. Some of the underground now is coming up, and but even 5 years ago, or whenever I started posting and reposting some of this stuff, I would get messages, private messages from people who followed me that I thought were super left and woke, who said, "Thanks for posting this. I really appreciate it. I mean, I can't post this on my account, but I'm really glad you're posting it."
You know,
But
there's a part of me that understands and a part of me that doesn't,
Mhm.
because you do have to be brave in the face of really bad stuff, right? Um, History teaches us that if you don't stand up and speak up, bad shit can go real sideways, you know?
Yes, to everybody and
Yeah.
everybody who thought this would just speak up. Tats is really worried, like, about the magazine. My wife, like, she's totally convinced that they're gonna burn her house down, and I'm laughing, but I know it's not funny. I mean, it could happen, right? But I don't know. I feel like, why can't we have something nice for us lesbians? What's wrong with that?
Yeah. And I think it's really reasonable to just be like, look, maybe let's say there's a group of lesbians that think they should include men,
Mhm.
okay? And they want spaces where men are included.
Yeah.
They're more than happy, go make those spaces. Go
Yes. Well, and
God's
those spaces already exist. My
Well,
God,
I know, I'm just saying for
I know what I
argument's
mean.
sake here,
Yes.
Godspeed, ladies.
Yeah.
Why is it then that us
Yes.
women and lesbians who don't want men in our spaces
Mhm.
and want a
Mhm.
space just for women,
Mhm.
why is it that we can't make our own space? That's the problem, not respecting other people's
Yeah.
boundaries to create their own
Mhm.
spaces.
Because, people equate it to, like, black and white segregation, right? Because trans women are women, right? And this is what we were talking about earlier, where we're not having the same conversation. You and I, our definitions are different than these handmaidens or TRAs or whatever you wanna call them, right? They must truly believe that trans women are women. I don't know how you can believe
Well,
that,
no, they don't though.
but
They don't. I've
you don't
explained
think they
this.
do?
No, because I once believed this, because I was
Yeah.
in this new lovely religion we have
Mhm.
now.
Mhm.
Um, I understand what the thought process is here. Okay, no, they don't actually believe that these men are in fact women, like females. They know they're
Mhm.
not because you can see with your eyes.
Mhm.
Um, but what they do believe is that everybody has a soul
Right,
that can be a different sex, and they call that gender, than what their
right,
body is,
right.
okay? Some think it's the brain and the soul, some think it's just the soul, whatever the case is, but there is this essence that
Mhm.
really makes you a man or a woman, not your biological sex. So what they're saying is, this person has a soul of a woman, therefore they are a woman, not
Ha
this one has a uterus and a
Yeah,
vagina and a
yeah.
female and they're female, that makes them a woman. No, they're
Right.
saying that the physical doesn't make them a woman.
The lady soul
The
is what
lady soul makes
Mhm.
them a woman, which then what makes the
They
lady
argue
soul?
with that.
How do you know there's a lady soul?
Yeah.
Well, obviously you want to wear ladies' clothes. That's how you know you have a lady soul. See
So
this
does that so
e-
are we men then? I'm
e-
just checking.
exactly, exactly. And this is precisely why it is so dangerous
Mhm.
to lesbians and gender
Mm.
nonconforming women. And
Yeah,
yes, it's dangerous to more than that, but this is my focus, so that's what I'm gonna
totally.
speak to. I'm
Totally. Well,
So
it's like I was
same-sex
yeah,
attracted women, this is
yeah.
dangerous to us.
I remember I was telling you the other day, I stumbled across this Facebook group for, trans men, I guess, and I went down
Mhm.
that rabbit hole. They were all posting before and after photos, and honestly, I was crying. I saw these beautiful butches, these beautiful lesbians, and then the after pic like, they were gone. They were just totally erased, and I
Yeah.
realized, yeah, we don't really see that anymore. There are hardly any lesbians, visually, obviously lesbians out there anymore, under maybe 40, maybe 35,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
Like, they're all trans men now. Like, what the
I mean, yeah, there's the disappearance of visibility. I mean, old school liberalism, talks about the importance of visibility,
Yes.
right?
Yeah,
Okay?
yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
and
I
that's what and I must say that is one of my concerns with groups like Gays Against Groomers. I love some of the work they've done, don't get me wrong, but
I
I
do
do
not.
no, I like that they're so out there and visible and aggressive, not because that's my style, but I think
Mhm.
to some extent you have to be a little bit.
Okay.
However, my big issue with them is they're against any kind of, well, what's the word you just used? Visibility, I guess. Yeah,
Visibility.
yeah,
Mhm.
and that's one thing, when I came out of the closet, and I was still a classroom teacher at the time, I was never going back in. So it's not like I talked about, "Hey, I'm gay," I didn't come out to my students, but I certainly had photos of my wife and kids up in the classroom and, it was no secret that I was a lesbian. And I think that's so important because if I had had teachers like me, maybe I wouldn't have waited 38 years, you
No, I
know?
mean, old school, gay activism and gay
Yeah.
rights stuff really was about normalizing
Yes, exactly.
homosexuality. Like,
Yeah.
no, not normalizing it
Right.
like everybody should be it, not
Right.
making people,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
But there are
normalizing it
parts
like,
of society, members of
yeah,
society who happen to be gay, right?
yeah, generally
Yeah.
speaking, there's a small minority of society that are homosexual, and it's not
Right.
a big deal. It's no different than
Exactly.
heterosexuality, right?
Exactly.
Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah.
Sarah has 2 moms. Hey, that's okay. Sarah
Yeah.
has a dad and a mom. That's okay too. That
Exactly.
was the goal, right?
Yes, totally. And now it's being turned into a total clown show. You know?
Yeah,
And
no, I know.
we all get taken along in that, swept up in that chaos. So
Yeah.
it's yeah, I
I mean,
know.
I
It's very
my
sad.
big thing with the Gays Against Groomers is, like, right from the start, the name.
I know. I know.
Right there. The name ends all, like, good reputation you could ever build because
I know.
you've hooked up gay and groomer together,
I
and
know. I
it's like,
know.
do you not know any of the history
I
of gay
know.
rights at
I
all?
know. I know.
It's just ignorant, like, it's
Yeah,
just fucking ignorant. But
I
anyways,
know.
you
I know.
completely have a right to like them
Yeah,
if you want.
yeah,
You
yeah.
go, girl. Me, I
Well,
don't
no,
like them.
I'm not saying I admire them, but I do I appreciate that they've had the, I don't know, the chutzpah to just get out there and like they're really in your face. There's no missing them, which I do think lends an important component to the conversation. Because here's what I think they've done, which I think is good. They've let straight people know not all gay people. I don't know if that's an oversimplification, but one thing I have always found shocking, well, not shocking, but annoying and frustrating is that because I'm out and I'm lesbian, everyone assumes that I support all this gender ideology nonsense, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it is important, I think, within the gay community, lesbian community, to speak out against it so that because people assume, right? They assume, oh,
yeah.
you're part of the LGBTQ, blah, 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 right?
No, I
And
know, yeah. I mean,
so that's, yeah,
fair
I
point,
appreciate that about them, but I totally get what you're saying.
fair
Not,
point.
not a good connection.
Although, have you looked in their comment sections?
Oh,
There
yeah.
is so much right wing, like,
I know.
fucking
I know.
borderline homophobic shit in there that I'm
Oh, I
like,
know.
"How much are you helping, really?" I
I
don't
know.
know.
I
That's
know.
but
I know.
I'm an old lefty, so whatever.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I'm with you. Were you talking about this or was I listening to this somewhere else about people feeling like politically homeless now since
Oh,
the
yeah.
US election about, yeah, you kind of don't fit in anywhere, right? But
No.
it's kind of freeing too in a way. We could just have conversations without,
Yeah, I mean,
which box are you in,
my big thing is I am not a one issue voter.
right? Hmm.
And so, you have to balance that out, unfortunately. Dude, it's a
Yeah.
total rock and a hard place. It really
Yes.
is.
Yeah. And
Um
well, we're all watching. We're all interested to see what
Oh,
transpires.
Lord. Yes, I'm interested in what the next 4 years has to bring as well. For women who want to support your magazine,
Yeah.
where can they do that at?
So we can drop these links in in your write up that they can either go to the website, jillmag.weebly.com, and then there's a button for subscribers and tells you how to do that. I also have a GoFundMe, is that what it's called? Yeah, set up.
Mhm.
So they can do that. Or if they're in Canada, they can send me an e-transfer or internationally PayPal as well. We're trying to keep it like the official cost at $20 Canadian per issue, which I just did a calculation today on all the content. Totally isn't going to cover the cost,
I
but
know.
it is what it is. So, and so if you want an issue, you can get one for $20 Canadian, and that includes shipping. So we'll mail it out to your mailbox wherever you are in the world. You don't have to be in Canada, obviously.
Okay.
Um, and we're hoping, I've had a few women kind of donate a little bit extra, which has been nice, because then that offsets the cost and then we can put more into the magazine. It doesn't have to be so thin because we have lots. Like I was saying earlier, the contributions have been just mind-blowing in their breadth. It's been just lovely to read all these lesbian stories, very exciting.
I'm really excited when
You
you
know,
when
and I
you
don't wanna
told me
cut any of them. I don't wanna cut any of them.
when you told me that you had a ton of submissions, I was, like,
Yeah.
so stoked. I was like, "Yes, good,
Yeah,
good. I'm
yeah,
looking forward to
and
it."
they're from all over. It's not just like, I know there used to be some great, lesbian magazines in the US in particular, right?
Mm.
But these are one thing that I think digitalization has done for us and globalization is we're now in touch with lesbians everywhere, so
Yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of exciting, and we can bring that back into this old school, format. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for talking with me, and I look forward to your issue.
Thanks. Bye-bye.